Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mike Perry. I'm the president of the Army Heritage Center Foundation. The foundation is the Friends Group for the U.S. Army Heritage Education Center, a component of the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. The Army Heritage Center Foundation is the Army's finest research collection, consisting of an archives, research library, artifact collection, and educational programs. Tonight, I'm pleased to have Dr. Dave Dworak. He is the Deputy Provost of the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. At the college, he teaches classes in history, military logistics, and strategic planning. He retired from the U.S. Army at the rank of colonel in 2014. During his 30-year career, he served multifunctional logistics, supporting operations in peace and in war. His overseas tours include the Sinai Peninsula, Germany, the Republic of Korea, and Afghanistan. He spent the last 6 years of his career on the faculty of the U.S. Army War College, where he served as an instructor and later as chairman of the Department of Military Strategy, Plans, and Operations. During this time, he also served as chair of the Curriculum Review Committee, chair of the Assessment Committee, and executive secretary to the Faculty Council. His academic credentials include a PhD and Master's in Philosophy and History from Maxwell School of Syracuse University, a Master of Strategic Studies from the U.S. Army War College, a Master of Science in Logistics Management from Florida Institute of Technology, and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of Texas in Arlington. He is a certified demonstrated master logistician. He is the author of the book, War of Supply, World War II, Allied Logistics in the Mediterranean, which is the topic of his talk tonight. The floor is now yours, David.
Thank you very much, Mike. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening and later on in YouTube land. It's a pleasure to be with you and talk a little bit about a couple of my favorite subjects, which is the war in the Mediterranean, theater of operations, and logistics in general. So the title of this little presentation is "The Theater Sets the Stage," and there's a couple reasons I called it that, and that there's several aspects to the theater I think that apply here. First of all, as we teach here at the Army War College, we have a theater of operations, we have theaters of responsibility. Here's our responsibility, theaters of war, and there's I think a correlation to the normal theater that we know and go to on the weekends or in the evening, and we look at a play perhaps. And the analogy I like to use is that when you go to a play, we go here to Broadway or somewhere, everyone focuses on the actors and the presentation that they're making on the stage. And that truly is really important, because that's really the essence of what you're there to experience. But what you don't often see or talk about are all those people who work in the background making that production possible. So it's the people with the lighting, doing all of the crew work, setting the stage. The production wouldn't be the same without them, but often they're in the background. Sometimes they're forgotten. And when I started looking at this topic here about the Mediterranean, I realized that it's certainly applicable, I think, to the services and supply and all the units that did a tremendous work setting the conditions for success, not just in the Mediterranean, but I would argue ultimately in the European theater as well. And the same can be said for any of the theaters of war. So the book has just come out recently. It's been an effort that's been undergoing for a number of years. But I think you'll find it interesting. Everyone who's read it has responded back in a way that they really didn't quite understand exactly how much goes into setting a theater of war, of managing a theater, or into doing all the administrative support that goes behind it. So that's what we'll cover a little bit here for the next 40 minutes or so. The Mediterranean theater is really about a series of productions. We'll start off tonight talking a little bit about what logistics is, why we think it's important, at least I think it's important. And then we'll do is see its impact through a series of operations that unfolded in the Mediterranean throughout the Second World War. Of course, this is for the Allies. There's a parallel effort going on in the Pacific, but this is our really first true experience, if you will, with expeditionary warfare in the modern age. That is where it's joint in nature, meaning there's multiple services, and it's combined as well. So the Allies will land initially there. On our slide, you see landings in North Africa. This will be in November of 42. And then they'll make their effort, if you will, to the east. Once North Africa is secure, we'll pop over into Sicily with Operation Husky, and then they'll move up into Italy, with a couple of major operations here, landings, avalanche, and shingle. And then as this theater really is mature now, that sets conditions to allow support of the European theater. And then now we'll see the Mediterranean support the Northwest Europe effort through Operation Dragoon into southern France. And then I'll wrap up a little bit talking about some the data I uncovered on some underrepresented populations, and wrap it all up with perhaps a short discussion of some of the influence that logistics and the Mediterranean had in general. So first of all, why logistics? Why is it important? I think Beadle Smith here, who was Eisenhower's chief of staff, really summarized it well. And that's, very often anybody can go around and look at a map and move units around. But Beadle Smith's insights are interesting because, first of all, he's there with Eisenhower, the Mediterranean, where they start their relationship, and then we start the Allied effort in Europe. And then he continues the course into Europe. And he says that the real business of war is getting, the right stuff to the right people that need them at the right place and time. And so he has a tremendous amount of experience behind that. Napoleon, I like his quote as well too, and that imparts the element of physics that the logisticians had to deal with back then, and we have to deal with today as well. And that is the element of time and space on an operation. Those are two factors that you just can't wish away. You can have all the money you want, you have the resources you want, but for time and distance, those very often will play a major part of, have an impact on what you're trying to do. There's a saying out there that I've heard throughout my 35-year career as a logistician. It's attributable in many ways to Bradley, although I've never found the citation for it. And that is that amateurs talk strategy and professionals talk logistics. Now, we use that a lot here, even at the War College, I've heard that said. The reality is that sometimes we say that, but we don't really mean it. And just look at the few books that are available out there that talk about military logistics and military support. There really isn't a whole lot. In fact, in this effort that I undertook, you don't find a whole lot of books about the Mediterranean as well either. So this kind of, I think, tries to fill a void on a critical campaign of the war, a theater of operations, as well as a specific element of it, which is support. And one of the challenges that we had, or I had in writing the book, is I didn't want to retell the tale of the operation. I mean, there's plenty of books out there that talk about these different operations. I didn't want to spend a lot of time either talking about some of the key generals and the decisions they made. Those are well known. So as we go through the different chapters, the different operations, what I do is just show just enough of the combat element, the operational element, just to set the stage, but then to focus on the logistics effort and show how important it was in some of the decisions that were made and how far the Allied effort came. So as we begin the war, it's July of 1942. War's been going on for a while. We're having a discussion about where do we go. We have the Atlantic Conference, which makes the decision we're going Europe first, holding effort in the Pacific. So on July 25th is when Franklin Delano Roosevelt actually makes the decision that we're going to go into North Africa. The key to that, though, is we want landings in November, so we only have just a little over 3 months planning time. And if you think about it, that's just not nearly enough time. Even in today's standards, if you had 3 months to plan a major operation, multiple divisions, different ports of embarkation, going by sea, we have the submarine threat that's still out there in the Atlantic. How do you plan that? And how do you do so when this is really, we're inexperienced, especially the American military, the American Army especially. So we begin the effort, the planning effort. What we see is it's really not well done, to put it mildly. We have split planning. The operators are planning separately from the logisticians. The logisticians aren't getting the plans until after they're done. In the meantime, they're having to submit requisitions from the Continental United States and from England for supplies based on guesses. They're not really looking at the operational plan. Plans are changed at the last minute. One example of that is that we need to do, of course, an amphibious movement into the theater of operations. And the Navy tells us that, tells the Army, Eisenhower and Clark, among others, that they can only bring, they have to limit the amount of cargo they're bringing because there's not enough gray-hulled escorts to accompany the number of convoys, the merchant convoys that they need to bring. So Eisenhower and Clark will make the decision early on that they're going to leave half of the truck transport on the piers. They're not going to bring it. Patton makes a decision to replace his cargo trucks with Jeeps, thinking a 1-for-1, hey, one Jeep is good for one truck. Even though, back to physics and time, a 2.5-ton truck certainly can carry more troops and more cargo than a 1/4-ton Jeep, which they'll find out in the shores of North Africa. But planning will continue. The ships are going to have a sail date that they have to meet. This is all new for everybody on what do we need to do? How do we balance combat power with combat service support? And this is a critical issue that remains in every operation even today. Tooth to tail, that's the debate. You know, what's the threat in there? The goal is to get on the beach, stay on the beach. What do you need to do that without getting pushed off? But at the same time, what's your operational objective? And for Eisenhower in North Africa, his operational objective is going to be Tunis. Unfortunately, because of the lack of escorts, we can only limit so much shipping. We don't bring enough trucks. What we find is this planning effort is really not as well done as it might be, which honestly isn't a surprise given the lack of experience. So when they make their landings, that lack of experience really is showing. We have 3 separate landings. The Western Task Force will be out here in the Atlantic, and then the Center Task Force and Eastern Task Force will be in the Mediterranean. It's interesting when you read the after-action reviews of the landings, because the Atlantic is known for having real high sea state. It's real rough conditions, which are going to make beach landings incredibly difficult. But on the actual day of the assault, what they find in November is the Atlantic is like a lake. It's flat, calm. But despite that, in the Western Task Force, out of some 378 landing craft, due to this lack of experience, mainly with the Navy coxswains, there's going to be 242 of those landing craft out of 378 that are going to be damaged or destroyed in this first landing. Now, I often use that statistic in these some of my presentations or classes I give here, and the students really often push back and say that can't be right. But it is. I mean, this is their own report. So we've lost 2/3 of our landing craft in conditions that are unbelievably calm. So that's just an indication of how really inexperienced this force is. Eventually, we'll make the landings, though. There's going to be some French resistance that'll be quickly overcome. And now we begin, once the French surrender, and now we begin landing, establishing ourselves in theater in earnest. And this is what will take it for the first few months of the operation, is setting this theater. Patton is landing, and in his task force, you get a sense of his priorities, because he takes his G4, his logistics officer, and puts him on the D+5 convoy, which actually lands in D+11. So in the initial landings, Patton doesn't even have his G4 there landing with him. But we make it all through that. It's ugly. It works. There's some wonderful firsthand accounts of what the ports look like. These firsthand reports talking about just these mounds of supplies and material, incendiary munitions, food, water, all of that intermixed, cloverleaf of ammunition, just kind of all piled up on all these different ports and beaches. The problem is nobody knows exactly what's landed, where it's at, or where it's at. So when forces need it, it's incredibly difficult to find this material. And then because of the lack of track transport, it's really hard to get it to the units. The Allies have a further problem in that they left so much of the truck transport behind. Is once they've secured the beaches, now it's a race to get to Tunis. And not only do the Allies know it, the Axis forces know it too. So Rommel there is in theater, and as soon as the landings begin, the German High Command puts a priority on reinforcing North Africa. So now both sides begin to reinforce, but Eisenhower just can't capitalize on the opportunity that he has, because he just can't get there with his lack of truck transport. And so it's going to slow the operation down, allowing the Germans to reinforce. And that's going to create some significant issues. It's going to slow the operation down. While that's happening on the combat side, the theater is continuing to mature. We now have base sections that are going to be formed. We have the Western base section, the Mediterranean base section, the Eastern base sections. These are commands that are going to provide area support, if you will, divide up the theater into chunks. There's also going to be a theater services supply that's going to be established, and that's going to be in the command of this gentleman you see here in the middle of the screen, Tom Larkin. General Tom Larkin is one of the base section commanders, but he comes out very early in the operation as being one of the most capable and personable officers in the theater, and he'll be in charge of the theater services and supply. There's still an ongoing debate about what's the role between the Allied Force headquarters and what's the role of the actual log forces that are going to be doing the execution. We still have some of those discussions even today. But the key is that the Allies begin learning from it. So as the theater matures, now we have a realization that the Allied Force headquarters, where Eisenhower is at as a theater commander, is going to set priorities, do the overall planning, and then they'll turn the execution of the support planning over to Tom Larkin and the Services Supply. And this is how North Africa will begin forming as the theater. There's some amazing stories that fall out of here. One of those is they call it the twin unit pack and single unit pack, the toughs up. Realizing that there's a lack of shipping as follow-on convoys come in, the Americans decide to start putting unit packs of either single units or single unit vehicles or 2 vehicles in a unit pack, and they basically containerize it into wooden crates. So the wheels are one crate, the engine and transmission might be in one crate, the body is in another crate. And all these crates now result in a 59% savings in transportation requirement, which is fantastic. So I can use fewer ships to get more trucks, more vehicles into the theater of operations. But the requirement then, or the need then, is how do you assemble all this and make some sense out of it? So very quickly, the Allies will take over. It's an amazing story. This muddy field, they'll use ruckers and cranes, bring it all in, and eventually they'll have over 1 million square feet covered of putting these vehicles together. The goal is to assemble and test drive 100 vehicles a day. They eventually get up to, I think their max was 143. So not a lot of people know about it, but it's a critical element for how you get this theater up and running. They do the same thing with locomotive stock as well too. They're bringing in rail engines disassembled, they'll assemble them, meet them up there with some of the rail stock, and then they're doing what they can to improve the infrastructure of the country. Another critical part to North Africa is the Free French forces. So as the Free French surrender and flip over to the Allied side, now the Allies find an additional between almost 200,000 and 300,000 French that they have to equip with everything, from uniforms to major equipment to aircraft. That likewise is an amazing story, has worth books of its own, but all adds up to this logistics requirement now that besides the fighting that's going on, that Larkin and Eisenhower find themselves having to deal with. In May of 43, on 13th of May of 43, eventually there's enough force and country, the rains have stopped, and the Allies are able to have victory over the Germans. And that's going to result in 275,000 prisoners of war, which again, logistically is another requirement that you have to support. So at the end of it all, by May, Ike will later write that looking back on his experience in North Africa, they failed initially because of 3 reasons. The first reason was they had insufficient strength to go the distance they needed from the beaches to Tunis. That was compounded by the lack of truck transport, most of which they left on the beaches. And the third element was the stalling allowed the fall rains to come in, which impacted their air operations. All that effectively slowed the operation, added probably 2 to 3 months onto a combat phase that was really unnecessary. But again, hindsight is 2020. So as they begin wrapping up North Africa, they begin planning now for movement into Sicily. This is going to be Operation Husky. And on the 9th of July now, there'll be this amphibious assault of the British and American forces into Sicily. Well, it is an improvement in planning. The logisticians are better connected to the operators as they begin planning it. They're going to have experience, or they're going to gain experience in how to mount the operation. So mounting is where you take all the personal equipment, do waterproofing if you need to, get it uploaded onto ships, and then transport those ships, get them ready for the assault. That's mounting. So we can actually do most of the mounting in North Africa, realizing it's much easier to do it there than to do it from the US and Great Britain. Several of the units, a couple of divisions are already there in North Africa, and a lot of the material is there as well too that's been built up as the theaters matured. So we're going to use one of the Eastern Base Section under the command of General Pence is going to be heading the embarkation effort. And he's going to mount up the American 7th Army. The British will take care of the 8th Army. Initially, the Americans are aiming to go into Palermo. And the reason they want to go into Palermo is because of the port. And they realize the experience in North Africa, it's all about the ports and how do you leverage the port facilities that are there. Everyone knows the story of Montgomery walking into the headquarters, finding Smith and saying, no, we need to do something differently. If it's accurate, coming up to the men's room mirror, sketching out a little diagram that shows, no, we really need side by side so we don't have any exposed flanks. So the British will be to the east and the Americans will be to the west. And that's ultimately what they have to end up with. That planning, though, has an impact on logistics because, back to the plan, logisticians were planning for Deepwater Port in Palermo, separate operation, and suddenly they're told, no, we're going something else. So they have to scrap that and restart. Sicily is unique in that there's a couple pieces of equipment that show up that are really helpful. One of those you'll see in the center of the screen. That's the DUK, the D-U-K-W. It's an amphibious vehicle. It can swim, it can drive on land. A lot of those are still around today in different amusement parks and areas around the US. So you can still find them. It's a 2.5-ton cargo vehicle is basically what it is. It's not great on sea, it's not great on land, but it's good enough to do both. This is the first time that we see in this theater the use of that type of vehicle. We also see landing ship tank, the LSTs. You see one here in the background on one of the beaches, a couple of them. These are tremendously capable amphibious craft that can haul tremendous amounts of vehicles, of men, of supplies, whatever you might need. Again, how to get the right stuff to the right place at the right time. Another operational piece of equipment that's tossed in just to consider is the bazooka as well too. And just like all these others, there isn't a lot of doctrine, there isn't a lot of accompanying material instructions on how to use these pieces of equipment. So as the Allies get them, they have to figure out how best to use them at the time. And what we find is Sicily shows that you can in fact support major operations, Army size, over beaches without terrific ports. But there are still challenges. One of those is there's a beach scene down there at the very bottom. I think that's Scoletti, which shows just some of the challenges. Is again, the context of this is really hard to fathom. Just the number of forces, the number of vehicles, and the amount of material that's coming out of the beach is just thousands and thousands of tons of stuff very quickly. How do you make sense of it all? One of the things that the Americans are going to do is have an organizational structure to try to address some of the challenges they saw in North Africa. And that's going to be establishing these engineer special brigades. They're called beach brigades sometimes, and regiments. They're going to triple the size of the organizations from what they had in North Africa. They have elements of not just engineer, but quartermaster. There's some transportation elements in there too, maybe a little bit of medical. These are designed to be little mini forward bases, if you will, to try to get the beach established and start receiving men and material. There's some insights, again, lessons learned out of Sicily. The beaches don't go real smooth, partly because we have these engineer special brigades, but to be quite honest, we don't put our best people in those positions. They put, there's still this thought of victory or honor is found at the front in the combat forces. That's where you put your best people, and you can take risk in the support forces. And what we keep learning, and Sicily is a great example of this, is no, you really need effective, strong talent across the whole battlefield, not just at the front. That's one of the insights they'll take out of it. But it's enough to get onto the beaches. You see the mules coming off. We begin using some of the mules there in Sicily as well too to get address some of the terrain. Sicily is really hilly once you get past the beach. Very tough terrain, and then you're limited just for a few number of roads as you move along, which the Germans are going to take to their advantage. So especially as the Allies begin moving north up along and they get into the northern shoreline of Sicily, the Germans do a very effective defense. They're trading space for time, slowing the Americans down as well as the British. And logistically, another tremendous story of the war is not on the American side, but it's on the German side, is the evacuation out of Sicily. So between the 4th and 16th of August, the Germans will manage the evacuation. They'll take out Italian forces as well as German. Over 100,000 troops, 10,000 vehicles, and over 18 short tons, 1,000 short tons of material. So it's very well done, very little interdiction. And that's why some people really question if Sicily is a victory or not. But what's important here is that the Allies have learned more with their experience. Support is better than it was in North Africa. There's still some challenges with medical supplies in Sicily, but on every one of these operations, we're learning and we're seeing new equipment, new organizations, new structures, new doctrine come into the force. This takes us now into Italy. So as Sicily begins to wrap up, there's a 23-day separation between Sicily and the invasion in Italy. So what we're going to do in Italy is we have a challenge. We want to get as far north as we can, but there's a lot of access air that you have to be concerned with. So the further north you are, there's more enemy air cover. That is something you want to try to stay away from. So we'll make the decision to land at Toronto with the British and into Salerno with the Americans. This will occur on the 9th of September, 1943. Over in Salerno, 5th Corps is going to land with 125,000 men. That eventually is going to grow to over 225,000. They're also going to have 45,000 vehicles and 153,000 short tons of supplies. The challenge with talking numbers like this is it's really hard for us to fathom in today's context just how much that really is, and to get an understanding of the magnitude of the effort to prepare it for movement. First of all, to get it produced and assembled, then get it prepared for movement, and then land at the right place at the right time. And then have some awareness of what you landed and where it's at. But we're getting a little bit better as we go along. Still, there's some challenges with planning. Our logistics plans aren't well coordinated with the Navy. That will produce some challenges. We also forget to do things such as actually requisition aircraft fuel. That'll eventually come in a little bit late. There's a funny story that there was boxes that are loaded up. One is marked special equipment. And when the box breaks open at the pier, a bunch of shoes come tumbling out of it, which probably aren't special equipment. In another case, they take a box full of incendiary munitions and it ends up in an officer's wardroom on board a ship, and they figure that's probably not the best place for it either, so it's eventually moved. What we do find in Salerno, and as we go through Operation Avalanche and later on in Shingle, is that there's still congested beaches. There's not enough time to really learn all the lessons we need to learn from Sicily. Things are better, but there's still some challenges. A couple examples you see here where there is some great ingenuity is first up in the right-hand corner here. The Germans do a great job as we begin moving north into Naples. Now we want to get to Naples because that's a deep water port. It's got 72 berths in it for ships. But the Germans have done a great job of really destroying the port, sinking ships. Only 3 berths are going to be operational. The Navy and the Army are going to get really, really good at clearing ports as we go along, basically improving infrastructure. You see another picture there in the middle of what the Italian rail looks like after the Germans have taken a train with a big hook on it, ran up the line to destroy all the rail line. They'll destroy it. We'll get really good at repairing it. Italy is also the place where we're going to get really good at supporting mountainous terrain. And it's something a little bit new for us. You compare that to the distances and speed of North Africa. Now what we have is the mountains of Italy, where we're reduced to pack boards that the troops are going to be carry between 50 and 100 pounds. And also quite a few mules and horses are going to be brought in as well too, which is another amazing story. By 1944, the Fifth Army in Italy is going to be using over 18,000 mules and over 3,000 horses. And that's going to require 23 different remount units distributed all across the peninsula. Another funny story is they're bringing a shipload of hops in to help with the brewery industry in Italy. And they're also bringing in a bunch of mules along with it on the same ship. Well, by the time the ship lands, they find the mules have gotten into hops, and the hops are mostly gone, and the mules are all bloated up from their buffet. But they learned to figure all that kind of out. Those are just little side stories to this tremendous story that's happening in Italy. Italy now is going to mature into its own little mini theater, if you will. And the Peninsula Base section, which is going to be the unit responsible, is going to do everything from breweries to hospitals to running lumber yards. Just an amazing effort, all the stuff it takes to support an army. This is going to set conditions then for the movement, Allied movement into southern France with Operation Dragoon. So Dragoon is going to go land. And the primary areas we're looking at in southern France are going to be the ports of Marseille and Toulon. So these are very large ports. Marseille itself has 10 basins, 13 different miles of quays. Its peacetime capability is 20,000 short tons per day, which is critical because, according to the Army planners, logisticians, the 6th Army Group is going to need 15,000 short tons themselves per day, which is a tremendous amount of material. And the only way you're going to get that is you're not going to get that across the beaches. You're going to need to get that through the ports. So we'll have this, again, a multi-division plan. Of note, the first French Army is going to be landing as well too. This is the return of the French Army to France. It's a critical component to this operation, and they're well received. They give them a very important mission as well too. One of the challenges with the French is that again, this prioritization of combat forces over support forces. And when you look at the size of the French army, they estimate that they need 112,000 service troops to support the French army. In reality, they only have 29,000. So who's going to make up the difference? Well, it's going to be the American service supply, which is going to have to make up that difference. So they're going to take them under their wing just as another American unit, outfitting them with everything that they possibly need. There's going to be the landings will occur on August 15th across 60 miles. Over 900 ships will take part in it. And it's a very quick drive. And this is really what I think characterizes the fight in southern France, is this quick drive. So it's we expect not to secure the ports of Toulon and Marseille by maybe by D+40, but by D+14, both ports are already into operation. It's an amazing story as well too, because when you look at the amount of shipping that's been sunk by the Germans in these ports, it's very quickly recovered. So by the first day, for example, in Marseille, they're offloading over 1,000 short tons. And within 30 days, that has improved to 19,000 short tons, which is, again, it's a clearing of over 200,000 tons of shipping that's been sunk by the Germans, which is not just sinking the ships, but they're sinking them in such a way that they're stacked on top of each other. So it's really hard to untangle it all. And they're interweaving mines into it all as well, too, just to make it even more difficult for the Allies. But eventually we will get the ports clear, and now begins this tremendous sustainment effort. You see the map on the right, which is going to support the Allied movement up the Rhone Valley. It's a 400-mile pursuit, and it goes very quickly. And of course, as you can expect, once you have a pursuit like that with these types of forces, the two commodities you're really worried about, a little bit about ammunition, but you're really, really worried about fuel. And what's going to happen by October, and this is happening all across the theater now, not just in the southern line of communication, but the northern line of communication as well too, is there's going to be a slowdown because of this lack of supply, especially of fuel. And it takes a little while for the theater to get caught up. Eventually, though, we do get caught up. The engineers do a great job. They're going to rebuild 42 different bridges, 800 miles of track just to try to facilitate this movement. They're going to be laying petroleum pipeline as well too, so that by February now, it's we're able to start breaking out of everything, get the pursuit going again, and continue on. And then you get into the spring of 45, where we kind of know how things work out. The other interesting element here is in the spring of 45, February of 45, is when the southern line of communication and the northern line of communication link up. So the northern line of communication is coming out of Normandy, extending on down. The southern line of communication is coming up, and it's one of the aspects which is really interesting is to compare the support effort between those two lines of effort. And the southern line of communication, you really see very few supply challenges that are systemic, other than the lack of fuel, which is just kind of all over the place eventually in the fall. Compare that to the northern line of communication, which is commanded by General John C.H. Lee, and much more problematic. It gets to the point where General Somerville, who's the U.S. Services Supply Commander, is going to come over to theater, do an inspection visit, find out what the heck's going on. And one of his recommendations at the end of his visit to Eisenhower is going to be, you need to take Tom Larkin and his experts down in the southern line of communication, which has been coming up and has all this experience in the Mediterranean, and interweave these people with Lee and the northern line of communication. That's what happens. And once those two lines, those two staffs begin to get interwoven, we have this link up now between the two lines of communication. It's much improved and many fewer logistics issues than what they had before. I'll talk real quick about Malta. It's interesting. It kind of gets lost in the story a little bit. But Malta, of course, is a British island there in the Mediterranean, and it becomes really critical for control of the Med. And it's a thorn, honestly, in the Italians and the Germans throughout the entire war. Hitler's going to try early on to just bomb it into pieces. It's going to be a kind of a half-done effort. They do it significant damage to the island, but then they let off a little bit because, again, there's resource requirements and priorities all over the place. it's hard for Hitler to support all the theaters that he's engaged in. And it's enough of a breathing room for Malta to get resupplied, get additional aircraft are going to come in, and shipping is going to come in. And then for the rest of the war now, the British especially are going to be interdicting German logistics, which are really supplied by the Italians coming out of Italy. There's been a few studies on this as far as Rommel's needs, and there's an assessment that there's just enough material getting through to support Rommel's forces. But the reality is, in fights like this, major combat over great areas of terrain, just enough really doesn't cover it very often. You need enough to provide some operational agility and flexibility, and Rommel just doesn't have that. And one of the reasons he doesn't have that is because of what's coming out of Malta. So as you look through it, the Germans are almost every German interview I read that dealt with the Mediterranean, from Kesselring, who is the theater army commander, on down to this major who's running the supplies. Everybody's complaining about Malta and what a mistake it was not to deal with it convincingly early on in the war. So a little bit about underrepresented populations. Very often, not only is the combat forces getting all the attention, but if we're honest, it's some of our underrepresented populations, women and the Black Americans and others, don't get the credit that they really deserve. So North Africa is a place where we start seeing now the role that women can really play in our armed forces. This plays out in the WACs. And this is an experiment for our nation. And what is the role of females, of women in combat? Because this is really what we're talking about, not just in supporting the effort back in the U.S., but forward as well too. So we see experimentations going on with putting women certainly, in secretarial roles, but some of the more non-traditional roles as well too. Map making, linguistics, things of that sort. And they more and more are actually find additional uses throughout the theater. And if you read the firsthand accounts of Eisenhower or his operations officer, General Bull, or some of these others, everyone is very complimentary of the effort that they're doing. And there's a good experiment, I think, or experience that shows just how far forward they can go. Up in 5th Army in Italy, there'll be a WAC detachment attached to General Clark's headquarters. And very often these women are 12 or 15 miles behind the front lines. And they're enduring the same hardships that many of the infantrymen are enduring. And they do an amazing job. There's amazing stories of heroism and valor among the women as well too. A WAC private earns a soldier's medal for saving a soldier from flaming gasoline. 2 lieutenants, Rita Rourke and Elaine Rowe, were both given the Silver Star medals when they saved 42 patients during shelling in Italy. We had 5 women who received Bronze Stars for heroism at Anzio. So again, tremendous contributions by these women. But this is just the beginning of realization of what an important role this important segment of our society can really play. Likewise for Black Americans. And our nation has had interesting experiences with Black Americans. They've been a part of our military ever since the Revolutionary War. They continue in every major conflict, but they kind of mirror society a little bit, where in the Second World Wars are now, post Jim Crow a little bit, trying to figure out exactly what we're comfortable with, what the American public is comfortable with. And at that point in our history, it's unfortunate, but they're not so comfortable with these people filling combat roles, but they are more comfortable with them filling service and support roles. So we find as we go into the 1940s, Black Americans account for 9.8% of our population. They're 11% of the Army enlisted population, but they're only 5.6% of the Army's enlisted combat force. So there's a sizable difference there. But you look at now the support forces, and Blacks constitute 28% of their service units, 42% of our engineering units, and 34% of our quartermaster units. So yes, they're not in the combat units, but they are playing an important role. They're contributing to the effort. And what I will argue is that the support effort is just as vitally important as the combat effort, even though it doesn't get sometimes all the attention it does. And many of the accomplishments that are there are being done because of these different types of units. The 22nd Quartermaster is a good example of that. It's interesting because it's a little bit different. It lands in Casablanca. It's a quartermaster regiment. It's going to land with Patton's Western Task Force. And One of the first things it's going to do is start training French truck drivers on the Lend-Lease vehicles. It's going to be driving over, while their time in North Africa, they're going to do over 7 million truck miles, averaging over 600,000 truck miles per month for this one unit. They'll then deploy to Italy, where they'll be part of the peninsular base section. They'll be doing the same thing for the Italian truck companies. And what's notable is this unit is going to get a number of unit awards recognized for its contributions. It's going to have 15 truck battalions that are black, 4 truck battalions that are white, and 2 brush truck battalions, along with 7 Italian truck battalions. A total in strength of about 13,000, which is more or less the same of an American division. What's really interesting about this, when you look at it, is the number of units are integrated with both black and white soldiers. Even though this is technically against some of the policy at the time, it's a sense of where our Army is going, and it starts here, and we see that in some of the support units. So wrap up very quickly and then entertain any questions anyone might have on some of the implications and insights. I think when we look at the Mediterranean, what we find is this is a place where experience is gained, and not just by the senior commanders, certainly Eisenhower, but everyone on down the line, to include the sailors on the ships, the corporals and the privates there in the combat formations, the sergeants. Everybody's gaining experience, and just as equally important is we're gaining experience. And what does it mean to set up, establish, and maintain a theater of operations, and do the administrative support behind it? So as we come through these different operations, through North Africa, through Sicily, through Italy, what we'll see is an evolution, if you will, in force design and balance. For how do what is the right balance of forces I mentioned earlier on each of these amphibious assaults. At the Army level, we'll start seeing new systems and doctrine that's going to be coming into play about what is, how do you support these different types of forces, these different types of equipment that's going to be fielded now. It really is an evolution. And there's a lot of innovation that's happening as well, too. And the last thing I'd mention, and I think this is as important today as it was then, is there's an understanding and an appreciation of what it really means to have a capable and robust support element that can maintain the rear area, if you will, and not just focus on the combat force. It really is a systems approach to thinking. You're only as strong as your weakest link, and you really do need resources and leadership in any of the units in the rear, same as you do in the front. And with that, I'll pause for any questions.
Okay, if you would please use the question and answer icon on your screen to submit your questions. I'll start with one. And I'm not sure if you look back that far. The Army Historical Division of the U.S. Army War College in the 1920s and 30s looked a lot at World War I logistic issues. Did you find any of that look back in the planning that was done for North Africa?
Yeah, I did. And in fact, unfortunately, due to size restrictions, I had to cut a lot of out of my original manuscript.
It's not a setup question, folks.
Yeah, that didn't make it in the book. But yeah, so to me, it's this continuity of history of our Army experience. In the First World War, as we know, we have the Army Expeditionary Force, the AEF goes to France. There's a support element with it. We almost fail. We come very close to failure, the AEF does in France, because of the lack of capability in the AEF. And Pershing's approach, you see a little bit of this in the early days of the Second World War. If he saw an officer do really, really well in the services of supply, he would promote them into the combat force. He'd move into a combat force. Likewise, if he saw this is Pershing now, if he saw a combat officer who didn't do so well, instead of shipping him home in disgrace, he would reassign him into the services of supply. So there was this belief of, yeah, you can take risk in the rear because the front is really need talent. And now you move forward into World War II, as we go into Operation Torch, start doing some of the planning. There are some lingering elements of that in our culture. And what's also missing is, because of when we went into World War I, we're rolling into France, deploying into France. There's already an established theater run by the French. So we don't have to do that. We just have to provide combat force enough support elements to take care of that. We're really not running the theater. So when you come into North Africa, this is what's new for the Americans as well as largely somewhat for the British as well too, from a combined aspect.
This question is from Marlon. Was Corsica of any importance in the Mediterranean logistics plan?
It is, and it's a small note that's in there. We will put a base section there for a while, and it's part of this movement of as we begin moving to the east and then up to the north. There's going to be these different elements that are going to come in. In fact, I think John Rattay, Brigadier John Rattay, who plays an important role in southern France, is going to be stationed for a while on Corsica, and he's going to get some experience here before he pulls that up into France.
Okay. You talked largely about, in a sense, supply. Did you look at maintenance and how maintenance evolved through the Mediterranean theater?
Yeah, it's an equally important aspect of it. We touch on it a little bit, quite a bit, in fact, in the book when you look at, well, just getting equipment there, getting it assembled, and then moving it on, getting it maintained. It doesn't get, just like supply, some of the attention that it does deserve.
Did they have the capability of refitting damaged equipment?
They do, yeah, to some degree. But this is part of what they're learning is, how long is it taking to get stuff, equipment from either from the continental U.S. or from England, versus what can you do there? And this is where they begin really good at. I mean, they're going to have I make fun of it. Typewriter, but repair facilities are going to be established in theater. And even today we joke about it, but the reality is, what's enabling communications across the theater is typewriters. So that's the type of thing that you need, in constant order in order to affect your command and control.
Like, we're happy they actually have typed orders that you can look at.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what's cool about the research is, not many people have looked at the Mediterranean, of course, or this element of it. When you go to the National Archives, there's over 400 boxes of the Mediterranean for the Allied Force headquarters. And when you open the box, you start pulling reports out. They still have the original paper clips from the 1940s that are largely rusted. Not a lot of people look at it. A lot of it still has the original classification stamps. So when you go through and look at it, the archivists have you pull the staples out and then do the declassification markings while you're looking at everything.
So you get to become a declassification authority.
Yeah, well, it's easy because after a certain amount of time, everything is just unclassified.
This question comes from Michael. Can you talk a little bit about the command relationship between the Army G4 and the Navy and the organization and importation of supplies and how it evolved and improved after Torch?
Yeah, I think there's two elements to what should it be and what is it. And from everything I looked at, there's an improvement between the Army and the Navy in coordination, but there's still issues. And part of it, someone asked me this a couple of weeks ago about why that might be. I think part of it is cultural, how we approach supply. The Navy is largely self-sufficient in how they take care of themselves. Of course, the Army needs Navy in this case to do everything. I think there's this planning aspect as well too. It goes back to requirements. General Magruder, G4 for the Army, wrote, and he was here in many of these operations, wrote a great book that you can find from the Center of Military History, talking about, I think it's Recurring Logistics Lessons as I Know them. And he talks about this challenge of requirements. And so it's an ongoing issue today. It certainly was then, of how do you really get your hands around all the requirements that you think you're going to need, and then plan for it. It's hard enough for the Army, this is what I've kind of sensed, it's hard enough for the Army to do that, even with the Army Air Corps. Air Corps shows up at the last minute, says, oh, by the way, we need bombs and fuel, and they didn't tell anybody. And then now, so that's within the Army. Now, how do you get that into the Navy planning cycle so the Navy can plan it accordingly? It's really ugly at the beginning. It's not as ugly at the end, but it's still opportunity to get better.
You got to talk nice about the Navy, because the next question comes from a Navy person. The question from David. As a post-World War II global power, did our military use more of the supply lessons learned from the Pacific theater or the European theater? That may take you beyond what your research concluded.
Yeah, that's going to go a little bit beyond. I would say it's probably both. The challenges that we have, that they had at the time. I think the Mediterranean theater is a good example of that. Is you're engaged in these operations and you're going one to the next. From North Africa to Sicily, and then you're still wrapping up North Africa while you're going to Sicily, and then you only got less than a month before you go into Italy. Where's the opportunities to really learn and share insights across that? Same thing for the Pacific. how do we get insights shared across these different theaters? There is some movement, especially among the European and the Mediterranean. John Lee, who's going to be the services supply commander up in Northwest Europe, will visit the Mediterranean. And he'll visit for a while, find out what's going on, see how they're doing things. But even with that benefit of firsthand knowledge, there's still challenges up there in France.
This question comes from Curtis. He says, North Africa seems unique in that both sides had to ship supplies by sea, with the Germans having a much shorter voyage. How did the German logistic effort influence Allied logistics efforts in North Africa?
I'm not sure if there was a direct influence other than it's each side trying to get as many forces into North Africa and resupply them as quickly as they can. So it's when you read the accounts, it's really interesting though. And I think this is a difference in appreciation that I mentioned there at the very end of the slide. So when you look at the Americans, so you look at Eisenhower and Smith and Clark and everyone who's fighting there, and on the British side as well too, Montgomery and everyone. When they have a logistics challenge, they're looking to their own selves, their own units to try to fix that problem. What can we do to fix this problem? So Eisenhower is going to grab Tom Larkin and go, we need to get this resolved. When you look at the Germans, though, they're relying on, it's always somebody else. So we're going to go back. We told the German High Command we need supplies. They're just not coming. We told Field Marshal Kesselring up in Italy, we need more stuff. The Italians are supposed to supply it. It's just not coming. It's somebody else's fault. So this really is this division of combat and support on the Axis side, which is different from what we see in the Allied side.
Did you look at the German or the Axis equipment that they use for supplies? And did they have things comparable to the US or the Allies?
Yeah, with the big difference for the Germans, there's two big differences I'll note. The first is organizationally. This is really telling in the theater. I think North Africa is a great example to compare and contrast. So the Americans come in and we have a tremendous theater structure that we're bringing in with these base support battalions and the services supply and all that goes with it. And you look at the rank that's in there too. Numerous major general, numerous brigadier generals are running that show. So there's this mechanism and the resources to not only prioritize, but then make distribution and get stuff to where it needs to go. You flip that over though, you look at the German experience and it's really quite different. In fact, Rommel's chief logistics officer is a Major Otto, if I recall correctly. And you just don't see that same theater distribution network on the Axis side. So an example would be if say that both sides need fuel, they absolutely do. So when a supply of fuel comes in for the Allies, it'll be received by the SOS. They'll know who has priority because Allied Force Headquarters has told them that, and they're going to get that to the priority location. When fuel comes in North Africa, it's whoever shows up to the port first and gets who gets the fuel. So maybe the armor is there first and they get it, but maybe it's the Luftwaffe who really needs the fuel that day. There's really no effective organization to make that distinction. And then the other element that plays into, of course, the Axis side is the Mediterranean. You get Malta out there, they really never control the Med like they want to. And they're only getting, at some accounts, 40% or less of their daily requirement of everything they need to sustain themselves. And really, that's what's really going to impact the Axis.
This is probably the last question, unless somebody pops in late. And of course, we couldn't keep it back in the 1940s. We have to jump up to 2022. Somebody's asking you about your thoughts on Putin's logistics issues.
Yeah, I got a couple of them. Now, this is all just based on, kind of watching the news. It's all open source, talking to a number of people at the unclassified level. But and we don't want to give away too many insights to the Russians so they can fix it. But I think what's happened is a couple of things. One is they don't have, it's a little bit like the Germans as well during the Second World War. They're a continental power, if you will. They're used to operating over long distances using rail, which means they're relying on civilians to move them around. They don't have a tremendous support network, and like we do. When you look at the amount of truck transports or just service personnel, it's really not comparable. So they're, from an organizational or a force management perspective, they don't have the same amount of support that we might. That's really compounded because you look at the incredible amount of artillery that they have. and their daily supply requirements. I did a presentation on this at the Cornell just last week. Average daily resupply for an American serviceman is about 125 pounds per person per day. The daily resupply requirement for an average Russian soldier is 4 times that. It's over, well, yeah, about 4 times that, primarily due to artillery. So you would think that you'd have a corresponding support network that could do that, but they're really relying on rail. So that's going to be a problem. I think another aspect that's, again, this is just kind of guessing, but I'd be willing to put money on it, is very often countries spend a lot of resources on the real sexy stuff like tanks and planes and things like that, and not so much on more mundane pieces of equipment like cargo trucks. So they probably have put more of their money into the combat forces and not so much in support forces. And then the third element, which is kind of playing itself out, is there's an element of corruption that's there in the Russian military that I wouldn't be surprised is playing itself out. So let's say you give your logisticians, okay, you need 400 million rubles to buy your necessary equipment. We're going to give you 200 million rubles. All right, I'm already at a decrement. And now that there's a good possibility that those, due to corruption, that 200 million rubles, well, for the same number of repair parts, I can buy cheaper stuff for half of that, and then I can pocket the rest of it. So instead of a top quality road wheel or engine or something like that, or transmission, I can buy something from China or wherever that's not quite as good. It does the job, but in combat, not really. And I think that may be part of what we're seeing here now too.
I think if you look at World War II, we underestimate the amount of logistic support the U.S. gave to the Soviet Union. Locomotives, wire. I mean, it was when you look at those studies, it was pretty impressive that we did provide an awful lot of stuff. One short story. I worked for a CG who had years called the division when everyone else was saying they were C1. Readiness level 1, he was saying we're 2 because we don't have the leader to lead ratio. It was a light division. We didn't have the number of sergeants we were supposed to have. So finally, they gave the division, any light infantryman, they gave them plus points so they could get the numbers up for the leader to lead. And he says, he brings me in along with the G3 and says, make us C2. So we sat down and the G4 says, well, we don't have the number of trailers we're supposed to have to carry 3 days of supply. So the CG says, make us C2 in logistics. And you should have heard the screams coming out of DesOps when we reported the division C2 again. Yeah. But he said, if you want doctrine, if you want to follow doctrine, then you have to comply with doctrine. And his argument on that one was logistics. So he didn't look at, the number of rounds we were putting down range. He actually looked at people and supplies as the key, which was sort of unique in my experience. So any closing comments?
Mike, just thanks again for the opportunity, and I appreciate everyone's interest here today. Enjoyed it.
I'm going to say great job. You held everyone's attention. In fact, higher percentage attended this lecture than most by a percentage. Folks who did attend, we will be posting this up on the Foundation's YouTube site in the next couple of days. This is an important topic, and I would ask you help us distribute it to your friends and associates about tonight's talk, because I think it was a good talk, and we want to continue to promote the book that's coming out here. It just came out recently, and let others read it. I would ask you, we're going to skip the first week of August to do a lecture. The next lecture is coming on the 24th of August at 7 p.m. We're going to drop back 2 centuries almost to the War of 1812, and we're going to look at the final invasion of Plattsburgh during the War of 1812. So I look forward to seeing you in about a month. Again, thank you for tonight's lecture. Look forward to seeing you here in the near future. Good night.